Emily Crawford's story began in the spring of 1872, in a quiet corner of Kentucky where life was simple but harsh. The town she was born into was a place where wooden wagons rattled down dirt roads, where families gathered around oil lamps at night, and where survival often depended on hard work and strong faith. In those days, every family carried its share of burdens: poverty, disease, and the constant uncertainty of tomorrow. For Emily's family, life was no different. Her father, Thomas Crawford, was a farmer who labored from sunrise to sunset just to keep food on the table. His hands were cracked from the plow, his back bent from years of toil, yet he never complained. Emily's mother, Mary, was a woman of deep faith, often found singing hymns softly as she worked, her voice a gentle comfort in the small, drafty cabin they called home. Together, they raised their children with the hope that each would grow strong enough to withstand the hardships of the world. But from the very beginning, Emily was different. While her brothers ran through the fields chasing each other with sticks, and her sisters helped their mother with sewing, Emily often sat quietly in a corner, her wide blue eyes fixed on something invisible. She was a quiet child, gentle but oddly solemn, as though she carried thoughts too heavy for her small years. Some neighbors whispered that she was too dreamy, while others worried that she might be sickly. Yet her mother simply smiled and said, "Emily sees the world in ways we cannot." There were moments in her childhood that hinted at the unusual path her life would take. One evening, when she was barely 5 years old, she sat by the fire with her grandmother, who was nearing the end of her days. Emily reached out with tiny hands and whispered, "Don't be afraid, Grandma. You'll still be with us when the light goes out." The old woman smiled faintly, as though reassured, and passed away a few days later. For the rest of her life, Emily would remember the stillness of that moment, and how she felt a presence linger, even after her grandmother's body had gone cold. Unlike other children, Emily was deeply sensitive to her surroundings. She seemed to feel moods in the air, noticing when someone was burdened long before they spoke a word. Once, when her father returned from a hard day on the farm, his shoulders heavy with exhaustion, Emily touched his hand and said softly, "It won't always be this hard, Papa." Though she had no way of knowing, her words brought him comfort he could not explain. By the time she turned 8, Emily had gained a reputation among her family and neighbors as a peculiar child. She was not mischievous, nor rebellious, but she often seemed distracted by something unseen. While the other children listened to the schoolteacher's lessons with impatience, eager to run outside and play, Emily would sit perfectly still, her gaze distant, as though she was listening to something no one else could hear. Sometimes she would murmur words under her breath, speaking to the air in quiet tones. The truth was, Emily was a child of shadows, not darkness but depth. She lingered where others hurried, observed where others ignored, and felt where others dismissed. And though she could not yet name it, this depth would become her gift. The community around her was both fascinated and unsettled by her. In 1872, Kentucky was a place where religion shaped nearly every aspect of life. Anything outside of the church's teachings was met with suspicion, if not outright condemnation. A child who seemed to speak with the unseen made people uneasy. Some neighbors whispered that Emily was touched by spirits, others claimed she was simply odd. Yet even in their doubt, many found themselves drawn to her quiet presence. Her early years were marked by loneliness at times. Children her age struggled to understand her, and some teased her for being strange. Yet Emily never lashed out. Instead, she withdrew into herself, finding comfort in the stillness of nature, the rustling of leaves, the quiet hum of insects, the flicker of candlelight at dusk. These simple things seemed to speak to her, offering her a peace that the noisy world of people often did not. But what truly set her apart was her compassion. From a young age, she carried an unusual ability to comfort those around her. When a neighbor's baby died during a harsh winter, the grieving mother sat alone on her porch, her tears frozen on her cheeks. Emily, only a child herself, walked over and placed her small hand on the woman's arm. "He's not gone," she said softly. "He's just somewhere we can't see yet." The woman, startled, later told Mary Crawford that Emily's words gave her more peace than the sermons at church. This pattern continued throughout her early years. Emily's presence became a quiet balm to those who suffered. Though she could not yet understand or explain what she felt, she carried within her the seed of a gift, a way of seeing beyond the visible, of hearing beyond the spoken, of touching hearts in ways that ordinary words could not. Still, her childhood was not without struggle. The whispers of neighbors weighed heavily on her parents. Thomas, practical and hardworking, often worried about what people would say. The world is not kind to those who are different, he once muttered to Mary as Emily sat humming softly to herself. Mary, however, believed strongly that Emily's difference was not a burden but a blessing. "The Lord gives every child a gift," she said. "Emily's will show itself in time." And so, Emily grew in shadows, not hidden but quietly preparing. Every silence, every flicker of intuition, every moment of compassion was shaping her into someone who would one day carry a remarkable purpose. She did not yet know what her path would demand of her, nor how much it would cost, but the foundation was laid in those early years of stillness, sensitivity, and quiet courage. Her childhood reminds us today that being different is not a curse. Often it is the seed of a gift the world does not yet understand. Like Emily, many of us may feel out of place in our youth, unsure why we see or feel the world in ways others do not. But in time, those very differences can become the strength that inspires others. Emily Crawford's childhood in 1872 was marked by whispers, shadows, and silence, but also by compassion, resilience, and an inner light that could not be dimmed. It was the beginning of a journey that would carry her far beyond the understanding of her small Kentucky town into a life of purpose, courage, and quiet inspiration. By the time Emily Crawford turned 10, her quiet strangeness was no longer just a childhood quirk. It was becoming something deeper, something her family could neither ignore nor fully explain. Her early years had been marked by solitude, an unusual sensitivity to the moods of others, and a calm presence that comforted grieving neighbors. But it wasn't until one stormy night in the winter of 1882 that her life shifted from curiosity to calling. The Crawford home was a small, weather-beaten cabin tucked at the edge of the woods. That night, the wind howled through the trees like a restless choir, and rain beat against the roof in heavy sheets. Emily lay awake in her small bed, unable to sleep, staring at the flickering shadows cast by a nearly spent candle. The house was silent except for the groaning timbers and the occasional cough from her father in the next room. It was then that she heard it. A voice. Soft, low, and familiar. At first, she thought it was her mother calling her name. Emily. The sound drifted through the room like a whisper carried by the wind. She sat up quickly, her heart thumping. But when she looked around, there was no one. Her sisters were asleep beside her, and her parents' room was still. The voice came again, clearer this time. "Emily, child, do not be afraid." Emily's eyes widened. She recognized the tone. It was her grandmother's voice. But her grandmother had been gone for nearly 5 years. For a moment, fear gripped her, and she clutched the quilt up to her chin. Yet along with the fear came something else. A strange, unexpected calm. It felt as though the voice carried warmth with it, as though the presence behind it was not there to frighten her, but to comfort her. She whispered into the darkness, her small voice trembling, "Grandma." There was no reply in words, but Emily felt something, a hush that seemed to wrap around her like an embrace. It was not cold or threatening, it was peace, and though the storm outside raged within her, a stillness took root. The next morning she told her mother what had happened. Mary Crawford listened carefully, her expression serious but not dismissive. She had always believed Emily was touched with a sensitivity others did not have. Instead of scolding her or calling it imagination, she knelt and brushed Emily's hair from her face. "Perhaps the Lord allows us to hear what others cannot," she said gently. "But remember, child, if you are given a gift, use it to bring comfort, not fear." That moment became a turning point in Emily's life. From then on, she paid closer attention to the whispers she sometimes felt in her heart. She began noticing that certain moments carried the same stillness she had felt that night. when the wind moved gently through the trees, when a candle's flame flickered strangely, or when someone grieving sat nearby. She did not always hear voices, but she sensed presences, a nearness of something unseen. At first, she kept these experiences to herself, confiding only in her mother. But as word spread that Emily sometimes knew things before they happened, neighbors began to take notice. A farmer's wife, who had lost her young son to fever, came to visit the Crawford home. She sat with Emily and asked softly, "Do you think he's at peace?" Emily closed her eyes for a moment and said, "He's not gone. He's in a place where the pain has no hold." Tears streamed down the woman's face. Incidents like this became more frequent. Emily was not dramatic about them. She did not shake, faint, or fall into trances as some mediums of the time did in public séances. Her gift was quiet, gentle, almost ordinary, like a child's voice speaking truth into sorrow. Yet its effect was extraordinary. But with attention came suspicion. Some neighbors accused Mary and Thomas of encouraging lies or worse, dabbling in dangerous things. Ministers warned against all godly voices that deceive the young. And though Emily was still only a girl, she found herself at the center of a struggle between belief and skepticism. The criticism might have broken her spirit, but instead it clarified her purpose. She realized that whether or not others believed her, what mattered was how people felt when they left her presence. If they left comforted, if their sorrow eased even a little, then she had fulfilled what she believed was her calling. Her awakening, then, was not just about hearing her grandmother's voice. It was about recognizing that she was different for a reason, that her sensitivity could be turned into strength if she used it with compassion. This period of her life also planted a lesson that speaks powerfully to us today. Often, our greatest strengths first appear as fears or oddities. Emily could have dismissed that first voice as imagination or silenced it out of fear of ridicule. But instead, she leaned into it gently, cautiously, with the guidance of her mother. By doing so, she discovered a purpose that extended beyond herself. As Emily grew into her teenage years, she continued to experience moments of connection with the unseen. Sometimes, she would wake at night with words on her lips that comforted her mother when she shared them. Other times, she would meet a grieving neighbor and feel compelled to speak a sentence that seemed to lift their burden. She did not seek fame, nor did she claim control over these moments. She simply accepted them as part of who she was. Her awakening was not dramatic, but it was profound. It was the quiet realization that even the smallest voice, one often dismissed, doubted, or misunderstood, can carry a message powerful enough to heal hearts. And that is the heart of Emily's awakening. She discovered that her difference was not a curse, but a calling. She learned that when the world cannot understand us, we must understand ourselves. And she chose to use her gift not for spectacle, but for love. By the late 1800s, America was caught in a strange tension between faith, science, and superstition. The Civil War had ended barely a decade earlier, leaving thousands of families grieving their dead. Epidemics swept through towns without mercy, stealing children from cradles and parents from homes. In such a climate, people longed for connection with their lost loved ones. This hunger gave rise to the spiritualist movement, séances, mediums, and claims of messages from beyond. Emily Crawford grew into her teenage years right in the middle of this atmosphere. By then, people in her small Kentucky community already whispered about her quiet gift. Some came to her with reverence, asking if she could bring comfort to their grief. Others mocked her, calling her a fraud or even a child of the devil. Emily's life became a delicate balance between those who believed in her and those who doubted her every word. The believers often came from places of heartbreak. A mother who had buried 3 children in one winter sat across from Emily one evening, her hands trembling. "Can you tell me?" she whispered. "If they know I still love them." Emily, calm and steady, closed her eyes and spoke softly. "They do. They have not forgotten you, and they wait in peace." The woman wept, not because Emily had given proof, but because she had given hope. But skeptics were never far behind. A local minister thundered from his pulpit that such talk of spirits is ungodly and deceitful. He warned families not to be fooled by the devil's tricks. hinting that Emily herself was being used as a tool of darkness. Children at school teased her, whispering cruelly about ghosts and witches whenever she walked past. Even some neighbors, who once admired her compassion, now kept their distance, afraid of what others might think. This world of doubt and belief pressed heavily on Emily's young shoulders. At only 14, she was caught between being a comforter and being condemned. There were moments when she longed to be ordinary, to play and laugh like the other girls without carrying the weight of whispers and suspicion. But whenever she considered withdrawing into silence, she remembered the faces of those she had helped. The grieving parents, the widows, the lonely souls who had found peace in her words. And that remembrance gave her courage. Emily also noticed something important: belief and doubt were not always enemies. Sometimes they lived side by side in the same person. A grieving father would come to her seeking comfort, but the moment she spoke, he would cross his arms and frown. "How do I know this isn't just your imagination?" he would demand. Yet when she reminded him of something only his late son could have known, a lullaby, a phrase, a small habit, tears would break through his skepticism. Belief flickered, fragile but real. Through these encounters, Emily began to learn a lesson that would guide her for the rest of her life. It was not her duty to force belief, only to speak with honesty. People would decide for themselves what to accept. Her task was simply to remain true, to offer her gift without deception or exaggeration. She refused to stage spectacles or perform tricks as some traveling mediums did. She never asked for money, never pretended to control what she could not. Instead, she stayed humble, quiet, and authentic. This choice gave her integrity, but it also deepened the divide between her and the world around her. Believers saw her as genuine, a rare soul who offered comfort without greed. Skeptics saw her as either deluded or dangerous because she refused to prove herself on demand. In both camps, she was set apart, admired or condemned, but rarely understood. Yet in this world of doubt and belief, Emily grew stronger. Every accusation forced her to examine her heart and clarify her intentions. Was she lying to herself? Was she only imagining the voices she thought she heard? These questions haunted her during long, sleepless nights. But each time she came back to the same truth, even if the voices were nothing more than her intuition. The result was real. People found peace, people found hope, and hope was never a lie. That conviction became her shield. When children mocked her, she smiled and walked on. When ministers condemned her, she prayed silently for strength. When skeptics demanded proof, she offered none, but neither did she retreat in shame. She carried herself with quiet dignity, believing that her purpose was not to win arguments, but to heal hearts. The more she faced opposition, the more she understood a universal truth: every gift will be doubted before it is celebrated. Innovators, artists, leaders, all face skepticism. Emily's gift was no different. The world would always struggle to understand those who live beyond its narrow expectations. But doubt, she learned, could not destroy truth. For us today, Emily's struggle offers a mirror. How often do we silence ourselves because we fear others will mock or doubt us? How often do we abandon a dream because someone calls it foolish? Emily's story challenges us: stay true to your purpose. Even in a world that doubts you, your worth is not defined by others' belief, but by your faithfulness to the gift you carry. By the time Emily reached 16, she had grown into a young woman known both as a girl medium and as the strange Crawford child. She walked with humility through both titles, neither puffed up by admiration nor crushed by mockery. She knew her life would never be simple, but she also knew she could not betray her calling. In the end, Emily's world was never fully one of belief nor of doubt. It was a mixture of both, a constant tension that shaped her into someone stronger, wiser, and braver than she had ever imagined as a quiet little girl. And from that tension came a lesson that still inspires: when you are true to your gift, you will always face doubt, but you will also light flames of belief that cannot be extinguished. By the time Emily Crawford reached her late teens, the whispers around her name had grown into sharp voices. No longer was she just the quiet Crawford girl who spoke softly about spirits. She had become a figure of debate in her town. For every grieving soul who praised her gentle words, there were two critics ready to call her a fraud, a deceiver, or worse, a danger to the community's faith. It started with subtle gossip, the kind that trickled through conversations in the general store or after Sunday service. "That Crawford girl thinks she can talk to the dead," someone would mutter. "She should keep her mouth shut." Others, more fearful than cruel, whispered, "If she isn't lying, then what she does must be the devil's work." Emily heard these things, not directly, but in the way people avoided her gaze, the way children were pulled away from her when she passed. The turning point came one autumn evening when she was invited to sit with the Turner family, who had recently buried their eldest son. They were desperate for comfort, and Emily, as always, approached with humility. She did not promise visions or proof. She simply listened, then spoke the words that came to her heart. "He wants you to know he is at peace." The mother clutched Emily's hand and wept with relief. But the next day, Reverend Matthews preached a fiery sermon in town. He warned of false prophets and youth corrupted by spirits. Though he never said her name, everyone knew whom he meant. That night, rocks were thrown at the Crawfords' cabin. One smashed a window, startling the family. On the porch, scrawled in chalk, were the words, "Stop your lies." Emily's father, Thomas, was furious. He paced the floor, fists clenched. "I'll not have them threaten my family," he growled. But Emily, pale and shaken, placed a hand on his arm. "Papa, don't fight them. This isn't their anger at us, it's their fear." Her calmness surprised him. She was barely 17, yet she carried herself with the quiet strength of someone much older. That night, as her family discussed whether she should stop speaking with people altogether, Emily made her decision. "I cannot stop," she said firmly. "Not when people find comfort in what I share. If my words ease their pain, then that is worth the accusations." It was not defiance spoken with arrogance, but courage spoken with conviction. Emily understood that her path would never be easy, but she also understood something deeper. Silence would betray the very gift she had been entrusted with. In the weeks that followed, the accusations intensified. Neighbors who once welcomed her now crossed the street when she approached. A group of older boys mocked her in the marketplace, chanting, "Ghost girl, devil's daughter." Her younger siblings came home from school in tears after being teased about their sister. Mary Crawford, her mother, wept quietly at night, worried for Emily's safety. Yet through it all, Emily remained steady. She did not retaliate, nor did she hide in shame. Instead, she leaned into compassion. When those same boys who mocked her later lost a cousin to fever, Emily visited their home and offered words of comfort. At first, they sneered at her presence. But when she spoke gently of hope and peace, even their hardened father lowered his head in silence. Emily did not win over everyone, but she showed them that her purpose was not to harm, but to heal. Her courage was not loud. She did not stand in the town square demanding belief. Instead, it was the quiet courage of persistence, showing up, speaking kindly, and refusing to let accusations twist her heart into bitterness. One of the most difficult tests came during a town meeting called to address concerns about her influence. Emily was asked to stand before the crowd, a room filled with suspicious eyes and folded arms. Reverend Matthews demanded, "Do you claim to speak with the dead child?" Emily took a slow breath. Her hands trembled, but her voice was steady. "I claim nothing for myself. I do not perform tricks or seek attention. I only speak the words that come to me, and if they bring comfort to those in sorrow, then I see no harm in that. I have never asked for money, nor have I ever sought to deceive. If you believe my words are false, then let them fall away. But if they bring peace, then perhaps they are not mine at all." The room was silent for a moment. Some scoffed, others looked away, but a few nodded quietly. She had not convinced everyone, perhaps not even most. But she had stood her ground with dignity, refusing to deny her truth while refusing also to attack her accusers. That night, her father hugged her tightly and whispered, "You were braver than any soldier I've ever known." Emily's courage in the face of accusation teaches us something vital. We live in a world where standing by our convictions often invites criticism, ridicule, or rejection. It is easier to stay silent, to blend in, to avoid the risk of being misunderstood. But Emily shows us that real courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to keep walking forward, even when fear surrounds you. She also teaches that courage is not about fighting back with anger. It is about holding firm with grace. Her strength lay in her refusal to let bitterness take root. She did not need to prove herself to everyone. She simply needed to remain true to her calling. In time, some who once accused her softened, not because Emily argued them into belief, but because her life itself became her testimony. They saw her consistency, her humility, her kindness even toward those who despised her, and slowly doubt began to coexist with respect. Emily Crawford's story in these years reminds us you may be accused, misunderstood, or doubted, but if your purpose is pure, you do not need everyone's approval. You only need the courage to remain faithful to your truth. By the early 1870s, Emily Crawford was no longer just the girl whispered about in corners. To many families broken by loss, she became a quiet beacon of comfort. They did not come to her seeking spectacle or grand demonstrations. They came because they knew her words, whether supernatural or not, carried a tenderness that soothed the sharpest wounds. Her reputation grew not through posters or proclamations, but through word of mouth. A grieving mother, comforted by Emily's soft assurance, would tell her neighbor. A widower who had sat with her in silence would speak of the calm he felt afterward. Slowly, carefully, Emily became known not as a curiosity or a fraud, but as something far more valuable, a healer of hearts. What set Emily apart was not only her supposed connection with spirits, but her humanity. She never dramatized what she felt or turned it into performance. If words came, she spoke them gently. If no words came, she simply sat with the grieving in silence, holding their hands and weeping alongside them. Many who visited her later admitted that it was not always the messages that gave them peace, but her presence, the way she honored their grief without rushing it away. One of her most remembered encounters was with Mr. Charles Whitman, a Civil War veteran who had lost his wife and 2 sons to illness. Hardened by war and sorrow, he had become a bitter man, shutting himself away from his neighbors. When he finally came to Emily, it was not out of belief but desperation. "If you can give me one reason not to end my days, girl," he said gruffly, "then speak it now." Emily looked into his weary eyes, then spoke quietly. "Your sons do not want you to give up. They are proud of the strength you showed them, and they wait for you with love. But until then, your life still has meaning here. There are others who need the courage you carry." Tears welled in the old soldier's eyes. For the first time in years, he softened. He left Emily's home that night not fully convinced of spirits, but with a seed of hope planted deep in his heart. In the months that followed, neighbors noticed him offering help to widows and fatherless children, slowly becoming a man who gave instead of withdrew. Emily's gift did not only touch individuals, it began to affect the community as a whole. Families who once shunned her began to see the changes in those she had comforted. They could not deny the healing that followed her words. Even skeptics, though they still doubted the source of her visions, admitted that she brought more peace than harm. Yet Emily never allowed her role to inflate her pride. When people began calling her the medium of Kentucky, she shook her head. "I am no more than a servant of compassion," she would say. "If words come to me, I share them. If they do not, I share my presence." She refused money for her sittings, accepting only simple tokens of gratitude. A loaf of bread, a basket of apples, or sometimes nothing at all. She believed that if her gift was real, it was not hers to sell. What truly healed hearts beyond the possibility of spirit voices was Emily's deep empathy. She listened without judgment, without rushing, without preaching. Many people in that era carried burdens silently. Widows left alone, fathers ashamed of their grief, children confused by loss. Emily gave them a safe space to speak, to cry, to remember. Her gift was less about talking with spirits, and more about reminding the living that love endures, even when bodies fail. Of course, not all were convinced. Some continued to warn against her, insisting she was dangerous or deceptive. But Emily never sought to argue with them. She would only answer gently, "If my words do not comfort you, then let them go. But if they bring you peace, then perhaps they are not mine alone. Over time, even some of her fiercest critics softened. One evening, the wife of Reverend Matthews, the very man who had once condemned her, came quietly to Emily's door. Her eyes were red from crying. She had lost a sister to consumption and carried a grief she could not share publicly. Emily welcomed her in, listened, and offered the same comfort she gave everyone else. The minister's wife left in silence but returned again weeks later, and soon she was among those who quietly defended Emily in town. Healing had reached even into the household of her loudest accuser. Emily's life reminds us of something powerful. Healing does not always come from doctors or medicines. Sometimes it comes from listening, from presence, from kindness that sees pain without trying to erase it too quickly. In a time when grief was often hidden behind closed doors, she created a space where sorrow was allowed to breathe, and in that space, healing began. For us today, her story is a mirror. We may not speak with spirits, but we all carry the ability to heal hearts. Sometimes it is through words of comfort, sometimes through simple acts of kindness, sometimes by just sitting with someone in silence. The world does not always need answers, it needs compassion. Emily Crawford did not live a life free of doubt or struggle. She bore accusations, loneliness, and misunderstanding. But through it all, she remained faithful to her gift, using it not for glory or gain, but for love. That choice is what made her more than a medium. It made her a healer. And in the end, it was not the stories of spirits that people remembered most about her. It was the peace they felt in her presence, the way their hearts were lighter after leaving her side. Emily's true legacy was not in the voices she claimed to hear, but in the healing she gave to the living. When Emily Crawford passed quietly in the late 1800s, she left behind no fortune, no grand titles, and no monuments to her name. She never married, never sought fame, and never traveled beyond the neighboring counties of her Kentucky home. Yet, her legacy has endured far longer than many with wealth or power, because Emily gave something rarer and more enduring. She gave hope to the broken-hearted. Her neighbors, who had once ridiculed and feared her, slowly began to see her differently after her death. It was not the claims of voices or spirits that people remembered most. Instead, they recalled how she made them feel seen in their grief, understood in their silence, and uplifted in their despair. When old Charles Whitman spoke of her, he didn't mention the girl who spoke to the dead. He said, "She kept me alive when I had no reason to go on." Even Reverend Matthews, who had condemned her so fiercely, softened in his later years. At her funeral, he admitted before the small gathering, "I do not know if her gift came from God, from her own heart, or from some place in between. But I know this, she healed more souls than I ever did with all my sermons." His words, unexpected and humbling, captured the truth of her legacy. Emily's story spread in small, quiet ways. Families passed it down through generations, not as a tale of superstition, but as a reminder of the power of compassion. Mothers told their children, "Remember Emily Crawford, the girl who sat with the grieving." Young people who felt misunderstood found courage in her example. Widows and widowers carried her memory as proof that one person's kindness can soften the sharpest grief. Her legacy is not in the debates about whether she truly spoke with spirits. That question, even in her lifetime, was never fully answered. What cannot be denied, however, is the impact of her presence. She lived in a time when loss was constant, when death came suddenly, and when few knew how to comfort the grieving. Emily stepped into that void untrained and uninvited and filled it with compassion. In this way, Emily's life teaches us that legacy is not measured by achievements carved in stone, but by love etched into hearts. Her name may not appear in history books, yet the quiet healing she offered has outlasted the memory of those who once mocked her. That is the paradox of true legacy. The world forgets titles and riches, but it never forgets kindness. There is also another part of her legacy, the courage to be misunderstood. Emily showed that living with integrity often means living under scrutiny. She did not wait for the approval of others to validate her calling. She lived it anyway, with dignity and humility. For anyone today who feels called to walk a different path, whether as an artist, a dreamer, a healer, or a voice for change, Emily's life is a reminder you do not need everyone to believe in you. You only need to remain faithful to what you know is true, and her legacy extends even further. Emily revealed a profound truth about grief and healing. Sometimes, what people need most is not answers but presence. She could not prove life after death, nor did she try. What she gave was something simpler and far more powerful: the assurance that love continues, and that no one is alone in their sorrow. For this reason, even skeptics who doubted her voices admitted that she gave comfort that could not be denied. Imagine for a moment the courage it took for a young girl in 1872 to carry such a burden. She was not educated in philosophy or trained in theology. She was just a child who felt something stirring within her, and she chose not to silence it. How many of us, faced with ridicule and fear, would have hidden our gifts? Yet Emily pressed on, not to gain praise but to serve others. That choice, that steadfastness, is perhaps her greatest legacy. Today, in a world still filled with loss, uncertainty, and doubt, Emily's story carries a timeless invitation. We may not hear voices as she did, but we can choose to listen more deeply to the people around us. We may not comfort the grieving with messages from beyond, but we can sit beside them in their sorrow, reminding them that they are not alone. Like Emily, we can offer presence instead of perfection, compassion instead of certainty, and love instead of judgment. Her life also reminds us of the ripple effect of kindness. Emily never sought to change the world. She only sought to comfort one broken heart at a time. Yet, in doing so, she changed her community and left a legacy that endured long after her death. Our acts of kindness may seem small, but they too create ripples we may never fully see. The word we speak today, the comfort we give in silence, the love we show in hidden places, these are the seeds of legacies that outlast lifetimes. As the years passed after her death, the Crawfords' simple cabin eventually fell into disrepair and was reclaimed by the earth. But those who had known Emily never forgot. For them, her presence lingered like a soft echo, not a ghost but a memory of love. Her legacy did not need walls or markers to endure. It lived in the hearts she healed. And so, the story of Emily Crawford is not just the tale of a girl medium from 1872. It is the story of what it means to live with courage, compassion, and integrity, even in the face of misunderstanding. Her true gift was not communication with the unseen. It was her ability to touch the seen, the living, with gentleness and grace. This is her legacy: that one life, lived faithfully and humbly, can bring healing to countless others. That one voice, even doubted and accused, can still bring comfort. That one heart, unafraid to love in the face of ridicule, can leave a mark that time itself cannot erase. Emily Crawford's story whispers across the years to us: your life matters, not because of what the world believes about you, but because of the love you choose to give.